Stories like crazy, because everyone has mental health, and everyone has a story, and sometimes they're crazy. Join Lori Lane Murphy and me, Adrianna Prosser, as we talk about dealing with, struggling with, and managing mental health with storytellers who want to share their true life story. Get in the conversation with us and talk to us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe on SoundCloud and iTunes. Now, let's smash some stigma. On this week's episode, you're going to hear from me, my story, and I'm not going to edit it. I actually wanted to, but I think that you should hear my process. I'm still working through my grief and bereavement of the loss of my brother to suicide. And I'm going through a lot, but I think you are too. So let me know if you have the same feels or if you've been able to deal with them in a different way than I have, because I would love your insight. So now, let's listen.
Okay, stories like crazy. Before we get into all the lovely episodes with our other storytellers, we kind of thought, Adrianna and I, that we should probably let you listeners in on a little bit about us, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, you want to know. I'm sure you do. And I want to know, Adri, kind of what your story is. What gives? Why are you doing this with me?
So, once upon a time, as all stories should begin, once upon a time, I was a rage-filled demon.
Okay.
I let my red hair seep into my blood, and in the driver's seat was rage, and it drove me. It was my pilot. I would have blackout rage episodes. Yeah. Totally awful. And for the longest time, my family, my mom and everybody attributed it to being young, then it was being a teenager.
Okay.
Then it was the hardships of university. No, that is not something that is normal, to have fits of rage. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that it was me expelling my anxiety. I developed, there's a fancy word that's like, it sounds like a dinosaur name. It's like Triptyliocus or something. I'm going to find it and I'm going to correct myself. But it's the where you pick either your nails, your skin. There's another one where you pull out your hair or you pull out your eyebrows and stuff. And I pick my fingers. I don't chew them. I pick them, and I pick them raw. My hands are always looking like I've just been working really hard, like construction work, and they're always banged up with cuts and no nails and whatnot. And that is a sign of my anxiety. So I have like little bloody stumps for fingers all the time. And I do it subconsciously, like I just don't know that I'm doing it. And a lot of the time, those people who are closest to me, most notably boyfriends, when I'm watching a movie, they will hold my hand, and I'm like, oh, he loves me. But no, he's holding my hand so I won't pick my nails through a movie. Because in those quiet parts in the movie, you can hear the...
Annoying.
You can hear that, you can hear it. You can hear the, of me picking at my nails. And that's my anxiety. And so that was very, for a long time. There was a short part of my life where with my rage and whatnot that my mom sought out therapy for me. That didn't really work out, and I just rage on,
sister.
Then we get to the part of our story where it gets really sad, literally and figuratively. That in 2010, my brother took his life, and he had been secretly holding on to his depression and his suicidal thoughts for years. He had tried, apparently, because again, we weren't notified until after he had died, that he had tried to hang himself in a tree in a public park. And we were not notified. When he talked to his doctor, because he was of age, there's no reason to disclose. And there are legalities around suicide that boggle my mind. Absolutely boggle my mind. If a loved one is hurting that bad, and attempts, and they don't die, and they seek help, I really don't understand why their next of kin or their parents or any of that family is not notified.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that a thing? How is that a thing? So back to 2010, I'm having troubles in my relationship, and my dad knocks on my door at midnight to tell me that my brother has died by suicide. And my whole world just stops. And it feels like I lose everything but my cat. And that's where my show comes from, Everything But the Cat, because in that moment, my then boyfriend, my live-in boyfriend, we had been living together for about 3.5 years, decides that he is not family. He decides that it's better for me to go with my family and live with them for a time. Meanwhile, he's packing his bags and leaving me. So I lose him, I lose my apartment. A lot of my friends see my grief and bereavement, which is akin to situational depression, because it was situational depression. I could barely breathe. I could barely get out of bed. My bereavement just really hit very hard. So I lost a lot of friends because they looked at me like I was some sort of disease that the depression was catching. And or they didn't know what to say because, God, I didn't even know what to say. So I went through a very dark, lonely, sad time, which was 2011, because he died in November of 2010. So I resurfaced about 6 months later, enough to say, hey, nobody's here. I've been pretty alone and sad and hermiting, and I am an extrovert. So to hermit was even worse for my mental health. But nobody would really go near me lest they caught this mourning disease, except for a very select few who I cherish and are so thankful for, because I really don't remember a lot of 2011. It was very much like how I remember my blackout rages. It was like a blackout depression. And when I say blackout, I mean I am not drinking. I am not doing drugs. It was just so debilitating that my brain just kind of shut off. And I shut myself off from the world. So it was the darkest of times. It was the worst. It was dark timeline. And I went to therapy. My family went to family therapy. My stepmother wanted to do group therapy, and then I was doing my own therapy. So at one point I was going to therapy like 3 times a week. It was kind of intense. But I was doing it for different reasons, right? And in different situations. So the family one was very much my family trying to stick together and not break apart from this nuclear bomb that was my brother's death. And then the group therapy was trying to put us back into society and trying to communicate with others in a safe space. And then my own personal therapy was me being like, oh yeah, that douchebag left me. And he left me in the worst time. And I will never forgive him for that. And you may all judge me as you see fit, because I understand. I had a really great conversation with another mental health advocate, my friend AJ, about what is forgiveness, and that I am perfectly fine with not forgiving. But I've made amends with that time period, and I understand that people do what they need to do to survive. I digress. The story is that because of this situational depression, because of the way that I went through my grief, and because I resurfaced, people started to find me again. Through social media, through life, through the routine of going to work and finally going back into my life and socializing. And people would say things like, hey, you want to go for a cup of coffee? I haven't seen you in so long. I miss your face. Let's talk. I'm here for you. More and more, because I was less doomsday, like getting farther away from the actual death anniversary, I was able to talk about it in such a way that wasn't so oppressive, because I understand when I came in the room, there was a darkness that came with me, right? And it filled the space. It was like a static. It was like a tangible static. It's like when people say that depression is a black dog.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Bless you, Winston Churchill. That you could see this black dog, and it took up so much space that people found it hard to be around me.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started to be able to leash that black dog, people wanted to know my story, because I feel like people are fascinated by death.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just, it's something that nobody comes back from. You can't go on a vacation with death, figure it out, and come back from it. No, death is final. And a suicidal death is even more fascinating, because so many of us cannot understand why it happens. And I'm not saying that I do understand. I have more of a perspective because of my situation. But that people wanted to be close to that. It was like being close. It's like that thrill of being close to an edge, I guess. Oh, there goes my mail. By the by, we record this in my living room. And I think it was thrilling for them, but also my friends and these acquaintances coming out of the woodwork are good people. They want to support their friend that they know is going through a hard time. And so I think those people, that they wanted to support me, but also that, hey, I would be curious too. And I did show up. I did show up to these coffee chats and tell them, and it would be this like 45-minute storytelling of us over overpriced lattes, of me telling them what had happened and what I've been doing for the past 6 months. And a lot of them, at the end of that 45 mark, they would just be like, "Holy crap, Adri, that's a goddamn show right there. That's a Fringe show." And I'm like, "No, it's not. That's self-indulgent shit is what this is. You just wanted to know my story." And they're like, "Yeah, but other people might want to hear this too." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever, get out. And then somebody else would call me up for a coffee chat. And then somebody else. And then another person. And then another person would corner me at a party because I'm finally going to parties again, or like out. And people wanted to hear the story on repeat. So I wrote it out. I recorded it. And then I submitted it to the New Ideas Festival at Alumnae. And somebody picked it. And somebody phoned me. A girl named Stephanie was just like, "I need to do your story. I've picked your story. We're going to do a staged reading of it." And I'm like, "This is happening. This is a thing. People want to hear this shit. This is my shit. I am literally taking my shit and putting it on a wall for you to look at. And you're saying this is good." So that's how I felt about it. And technically still kind of do. Because it's weird when people want to listen to you for any length. It's weird. And people contacted me because I had put this out there in a consumable manner and called it theater, or called it storytelling, or called it performance, called it a presentation, called it a talk. Like, you call it whatever the hell you want. I was just telling my story. And now we are about 7 years later, and people are still asking me to tell my story. And I still show up, and I still tell my story. And that's where Stories Like Crazy feels like the next step. It feels like another platform that I can reach and tell my story, but also give space to allow others to be like, "Oh my God, yeah, me too." Because whenever I tell my story, it doesn't matter what medium, if it's in a blog through my everythingbutthecat.ca, or if it's at a show or at a storytelling event like Dare or Confab or Raconteaurs or whatever have you, people come up to me after, either online or in real life, and they want to share something. They want to share a touch point, like a touchstone with me, a keystone with me, to be like, "Me too." Or, you said this thing and I've never been able to say it, and that's exactly what I felt. And that is very validating. That makes me feel worthy of telling my story. That makes me feel like I'm doing something, and that I'm continuing the conversation, and that I'm getting out there and I'm showing you my scars and my wounds, and people are saying, "I've got that scar too," or, "Your scars are beautiful because it makes me feel something." And it feels like, I know, Lori, you said in the previous podcast that it made you feel validated. Like it validates what you're doing and that you're contributing to society. And I feel like that's something that is calling me too. That for all the days that I can't get up off the couch, or when I cry in the shower, or when I'm stopped cold in like on the street because I see somebody who looks exactly like Andrew, and it stops me dead. And I have a moment of, I can't breathe. Do I talk to this person? Do I ask them for a hug? Do I stalk them a little bit? Which I usually do. I'm sorry to all the people who look like a 22-year-old Andrew with big poofy hair and a big nose and glasses and whatever. That this storytelling is a great way for me to feel like I'm doing something. Because so often I feel like mental health is this elusive vapor. It's something that you can't hold on to. Happiness is something you can't hold on to, right? Like all of these ideas of like mental health and happiness and fear and depression and all that shit, these labels that we've put onto it, whatever it is, it's this vapor. It's something that you can't get rid of, like you can't push it and you can't hold it. But the only way that I can feel like I'm a part of it is to keep storytelling and keep making those connections and you know, showing up and showing my face and owning it by showing my face and putting my name to it. Yeah, and that's why Stories Like Crazy, thank you for asking me to be a part of it and for helping, like letting me help in growing this, because I feel like that's what this is. It's a place to connect, and through stories we make it real and we get a little bit more of that grip on something that is intangible.
I love your imagery. There's a couple things. I'm just so much. Thank you, first of all. But the vapor, I think that's a beautiful and such an accurate way of describing not just happiness, not just but any emotion, really. Because when you're inside your own head, and we've talked about this before in other podcasts, is that when you're dealing with depression, or we'll take depression right now, there are so many things happening, yet you're not moving. And so there's just, I'm trying to grab at something, right?
Yeah.
To kind of, to pull yourself up.
Yeah.
Out.
Up and out, yeah.
And then the other image, of course, is leashing the black dog.
Oh,
that is really good.
And just have it walk with you.
Yeah, or I have this image now of him walking with you, or even this dog becoming a puppy.
Yeah.
And you pick it up.
Yeah.
And you carry it with you.
You have to be kind to that depression because that's your vulnerable points.
And a lot of us spend a good portion of our lives dancing with it, right? So how do we make it part of who we are and not be angry all the time? And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. When you talk about rage blackouts, and then you talk about kind of blacking out when Andrew died, and it sounds to me, and certainly correct me if I'm misreading, that it's almost like your brain or your body, without your permission sometimes, shuts off.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so quite literally, my dad, and I remember it up until a point, because I actually blacked out.
Yes.
That I remember the door knock. I remember douchebag opening the door, me seeing past douchebag and saying, "Hi, Daddy," in the way that I always say, "Hi, Daddy." And my dad standing as this silhouette with a trench coat and his fedora, looking at the ground, and his arm, he wouldn't even come into my apartment, with his arm outreached to me, being, "Come here, come here," and he would fold his hands, being like in a beckoning motion.
Yeah.
And I came to him, and he held me really tight in this hug, and while I was in the hug, he whispered to me, "Your brother has died by suicide." And I remember screaming and then becoming liquid.
Yeah.
And I remember the feeling of being liquid and falling to the floor. Like my legs just gave out. And it was just, my body couldn't compute that sentence. It just shut down. And it's so very Victorian. Like, I just fainted.
You had the vapors.
I had the vapors.
But you know what's interesting to me is that, and again, the way sometimes learning of death or the death of a loved one is often either portrayed as, or even in real life, because I've seen it in my own experiences, that when somebody is told that a loved one has died, it takes a while to even not think it's a joke.
Oh, absolutely.
And for you, it's so, your feelings, your emotions are so at the surface. You knew, your body, whether you think you did or not, knew the gravity of what you just heard.
Yeah.
Like, instantly.
It's too much.
It's amazing to me that, one would think you answer, hey, oh, hi, Daggerman, and your father says this to you. I mean, you'd think you'd sort of smack him on the shoulder and go, get out of here. That's a terrible joke.
Right? Or like do what they do in the movies where they like put their hands over their mouth and go, oh God.
Right?
And then they start crying. No, I started, and apparently while I was down, I was screaming no so loud and so hard that the neighbors in the apartment building came out to see if somebody was murdering me.
Of course.
Like, they were concerned because my dad was in the doorway. So the door's open.
And he's wearing a trench coat, for God's sake.
And I'm screaming, and it's midnight. Remember, it's midnight.
Yeah.
And it's just, I remember then kind of like not waking up, but like you start to remember. It's kind of like when you remember when you're like 4 or 5 years old and it's like your first memories, and it's like, I'm at the zoo, then I'm home. Like, you don't remember the in-between. I don't remember getting into the car to go to my dad's house, but then all of a sudden I was in the car and I had the phone and I was talking to my boss. And it's kind of like, it was, from what I understand, like blackout drunk. Yeah, where it's like episodes, right?
Yes.
Where it's like little vignettes of memory.
And now we find Adrianna in her father's car, and here she is at his house.
Exactly.
There's no transition.
No.
And that's very much, speaking as someone who has drunk blacked out in the past, it's very much like, it creates choppiness in your life, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But I just think it's so... Well, let me ask you then. So when you talk about having rage as a younger woman, a kid, then a younger woman, and I think I still hear in the telling, and you've told me the story before, and you've told me in a very raw way one time, and we were talking about it, and I can hear you're still angry with him. No?
Oh, douchebag?
No! Yes.
Forever.
Do you carry some resentment to Andrew?
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Which I think is incredibly honest of you, because I think once someone has passed, particularly a beloved sibling, you love, love, love him, he dies by suicide, aren't you supposed to forgive? Aren't you supposed to let him go? And anger will kill you and all of this stuff. Yeah. This is what we hear, right?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
No. I mean, I've gone back into therapy for my anxiety. Aside from the fact that this past winter of, this past winter of 2016 to 17, I think it was like 50 hours of sunlight over like 4 months or something.
Yes, brutal.
It was brutal. And then for some reason, so it's the 6th year of bereavement, and for some reason, hitting the 5 mark, I got my tattoo, and like it was a milestone, and it means a thing. But now I'm in like this weird, like gray zone of, I don't know. There's nothing really so-called special about my bereavement. Does that even make sense? Like, it's weird how my brain needs to process things in forward momentum, or that I'm doing better, like, because again, that's what we're always told, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. The idea of that, I wasn't doing anything, and I slipped into a different level of grief, and it's been particularly hard. And now I'm forgetting your question
about resenting him.
So I've been resenting him, and like a newfound. We're now at the point where, like, I always try to find meaning, which is a really weird thing, too.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
But do we need it?
We're now at the point where it's the same amount of years that Andrew was away from me in birth. He was 6 years younger than me, and it's been 6 years. And I do these weird things where things need to have some kind of, like, touch point or touchstone in my life.
Or a pattern?
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I need to imbue it with something rather than, it's been 6 years. Like, it just can't be a fact. I don't know. Everything needs to mean something, or else it loses its meaning to me. It's really strange. But on the point of, like, the resentment and the anger and stuff, when Andrew died, and after that blackout, depression, grief hit that night of, I have never been angry again. Like, I've been angry.
Yes, but not...
I have not had the rage.
Interesting.
I have not had the rage. I was so sad and I was so deflated. I've never been able to get to that height again. And I think of that as a gift. I'm definitely more empathetic.
Yeah, and I think that some of our, listeners who are like me have never experienced rage like that, have never experienced sort of the draining properties of that kind of rage, and the damage it can do to yourself, to relationships, and so on. Yeah. But I think, so for listeners like me, wow, this is eye-opening, and I feel empathy because it's pain. It's pain manifesting in a different way, right? Mm-hmm. And then those listeners that can go, oh, shit, yeah, like that happens to me too, and I don't know why. I don't know what's at the crux of it. And maybe there's a time to look at that and say, is this kind of what I want to be about, or what I want in my life, and what can I do to maybe alter that or change it? But the thing that I find really interesting about what you've just said the last few minutes, when I asked you about resentment and anger, and you said, yeah, like those emotions are there, and I don't know that I forgive, and I probably don't, and maybe I never will, and yet you advocate.
Absolutely.
So you're able to somehow intellectualize and say, almost like, my brother's death is tragic, and I don't want anyone else to do this, and I want to call attention to the pain that that drives a person to suicide, and how evil this shadow of suicide is. Yep. And you can do that and still not forgive him. And there would be conservative sort of logic or conventional logic that says, well, you can never be free then, Adrianna, if you don't forgive him. Right. And yet that doesn't necessarily have to be the only way forward.
It's so true, because so many times, again, we find ourselves in memes and self-help jargon and all of these stereotypical retorts and whatnot, and the resources that keep coming up, and I totally understand where they come from, because there is always some truth to those things, but again, it is not one size fits all.
No.
Especially when it comes to mental health, especially when it comes to grieving.
For sure.
I had people tell me, don't you think it's about time you let this go? And I'm like, how dare you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I will not know to my grave.
Of course.
I will always miss my
brother.
This
has profoundly changed your life. I mean, it's a defining moment, really.
Yeah.
But again, what I think is fantastic about partnering up with you in this sort of way is that you are showing that there are other ways forward, that you can still contribute, you can still be angry at the situation, you can still not forgive, but you can claim sort of advocacy for something that has taken him away.
Yeah.
Like you're still able to, it's just a different way, I think, of what people would expect is perhaps you sharing your story and then saying at the end, I now forgive and release you, Andrew. and you don't.
No.
And I know that there are people listening going, fuck, I feel so much better because I am pissed.
I'm fucking pissed. And it's 7 years later. Like, it's 7 years this November. And I'm still angry. I mean, I'm not raging out, but I'm still
angry.
And, I have forgiveness. Like, I have forgiveness for Andrew. I have space to allow the understanding of why he did what he did. And I'm angry for him. Mm-hmm. I'm also angry at him because I was 2 subway stops away from him. And why did he choose to, go the opposite way to do what he did? I know exactly where he did it, and it was farther for him to get to that space than it was for him to come to my place.
Yeah.
And I'm angry about that. But I also have forgiveness around what he was going through.
Yes.
Because I also can't understand what he was going through. I can logically, and I can dissect it, and I can read books, and I can, I read, his files that were left on his computer that may as well have been called his diary, and I can understand to a point, but I would never ever say that I would understand what Andrew was going through.
Yeah,
because I'm not Andrew.
But the story of Andrew that you're sharing is a really profound one for people because it it shows, here you are 7 years later, the impact of what's the destruction that is left behind.
Absolutely still
right?
happening.
And you don't have to be okay with that.
Yeah. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, in order to move forward, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about both of our stories, now there's another podcast with my story on it, but what I will say is both of us have, our stories are very different takes on mental illness. So for example, your story is focusing on the very worst that it can bring, right? The very final, you said death is final. My story focuses on growing up in a house with mental illness, and it wasn't that bad. In fact, there was a lot of good. There's a lot of living with it and flourishing.
Yeah.
So no one size fits all.
No, and also and the other thing that I feel really guilty about are the good things that came from Andrew's death. Can I say that sentence? It's a very hard sentence to say.
Okay, you said it.
I am it's very hard because that's a terrible sentence to say, because nothing good comes from suicide. This is everything that we hear and everything that we do and everything that we preach. But I am a more empathetic person. I am now the person that people come to when they want to speak the truth without judgment. And several people, acquaintances, close friends, family members, have private messaged me or phoned me and asked for resources. I have had to call the police on a good friend because, they phoned me saying, this is it. And nothing's going to stop me. But you phoned me, so you want me to stop you. Yes. And I'm going to help you. And nothing, I obviously, I'm going to start crying. Obviously, I would give all of this up to have Andrew back again.
Of course.
But it happened, and nothing can bring him back. But you can move forward, you can do good. You can still be angry as fuck, and you can still do good things with the evil and the bad. And all of this badness has led to me doing good things.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps me sane, is doing good things from this shitty ass fucking fertilizer that life has given me, that Andrew kicked over me, that this dirt, this shit that I have to live through, it fertilized this good stuff. It fertilized something good, and that goodness can be supporting my friends who are going through a dark time, for being a listening ear, for having a blog where people can talk about things anonymously. The fact that the first person I called was my boss to say, hey, I'm not coming into work tomorrow because of this. And apparently she was having suicidal thoughts.
Wow. And
she heard my voice, and she heard the devastation, and she hung up the phone saying, I cannot think about suicide, because this is what I will leave behind, is this nuclear depression, and crush those around me that are close to me, and even those who are not. So instantly something good came out of Andrew's death. And it's really fucked up to think like that. And I want people to understand just how much that twists me up inside to say something like that, but that it's the only thing that keeps me going.
Well, I'm not sure, when you say something good came out of it, I wouldn't phrase it that way. I would say you found good in it.
Yeah.
You had to look for it. It's like, this is what I say about any mental illness. If you look for it, you can find the character building traits or pieces to it. Yeah. And for you, you never asked for that. No. You didn't want that. You're able to say, but this is the reality of what I'm left with. What do I build?
Yeah.
I can sit in the shit.
Yeah. Or
I can build something in his name.
Exactly. And it's always been about Andrew. And I know that, he was a creator when he was alive. He was making videos and music, and I don't know. I don't want to be so self-indulgent to be like, you know, he would be proud of me or blah blah blah. But that at least I can say I'm doing something in even a language or a medium that he would even understand and appreciate.
Yeah.
And like it is always in his name. It is for him, and it's for all of everybody who's feeling that isolated and that not understood.
You are giving voice, and you will continue to do that. And I think part of Stories Like Crazy and why we're sharing so openly, and thank you for that, because you give more to me in that story every time you tell me, right? So trust me, listeners, it's so nuanced, and I wish you could see Adri's face right now, because it's just beautiful in the telling of the story, because all of the emotion is right there. And I think that for people hearing this, our podcast is a place to hear pain, but to hear the good that comes from that pain. Yeah. It's a platform for that. Because what else is there?
Yeah. At the end of the day,
what else is there?
You have to make a choice.
Yes. And I don't think either one of us is suggesting that happiness or positivity are the choice and therefore I shall be.
No.
But it is about that mindfulness of looking in the moment. God, this is shit. What I have in front of me, or how I'm feeling, or this diagnosis, or my family member who left me. Any of those cards that life deals us. What do I take from it? Because what else is there?
Yeah.
And we want to share stories like that. We won't always be this emotional.
I mean, Lori's talking for herself. I'm an emotional wreck. I'm the one with anxiety, sister. I'm on the edge all the time.
Okay.
But that's the thing, is we're not trying to be preachy. It's just, this is my story, and I want to hear what your story is. Yeah. And I want to know how you dealt with the shit. You know, what painting did you paint with all of that shit? Because
gross.
Because it's gross. It is gross. Like, life can be gross and messy. It's messy.
Yes,
it's messy.
It is.
And smelly. And it's hard sometimes to just look at that shit and say, you know what? This shit is pretty. This is some pretty shit.
Pretty-ish.
Or it can just be some pretty gross shit. But yeah, I want to know. I want to know what everybody's story is and how they got through it, because you never know what they say. I might need to hear that. Yes. And I hope what I just said somebody needed to hear too.
Absolutely, somebody needed to hear it. I needed to hear it. I love to hear it. We want you to listen to us, and we want to listen to you. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you want to join the conversation, and we hope you do, come find us on Twitter and Facebook. And you can subscribe to us on iTunes and SoundCloud. That's it, Stigma Fighters. And remember, your story isn't over yet, and we want to hear it.